So was Jane Dowling, Jane Greenham, as she became, the model for the character of Jane Studdock in C.S. Lewis's novel That Hideous Strength? Well, Jane came up to Oxford in 1943, just when Lewis was working on the novels and starting it. She didn't, I think, meet him till the following year, so I don't think she can have been the source of the character. But having said that, Jane was among the first, if not the first, female undergraduates that Lewis tutored. And he was clearly impressed by her intelligence. So just by that token, she must have been in his mind when he was writing the book. Jane went on to become a very distinguished artist and a hugely revered teacher, which is how I came to know her. But that time in Oxford during the war, when she was being tutored by Lewis and Charles Williams and going to Tolkien's lectures, was very formative for her. So for those who don't know her work, which sadly is many now, it's not a bad way of introducing her. Jane had a Catholic mother and was sent to a convent school where her chaplain was Ronald Knox, who had got to know Lewis and was just reading The Abolition of Man, which he thought was the book that he'd wanted to write all his life. So he obviously recommended Lewis to Jane. Jane had been going to go to the Slade Art School because people had recognised her artistic talent. But when her father saw how well she did in exams, he asked that she should be put in for Oxford, and she got in. And though she actually continued to go to the Slade while she was at Oxford, she didn't get back to full-time art studies for quite some time. But you can see from this early painting what an extraordinarily talented painter she was. It may have been influenced by the drawings that Henry Moore had done in the London Underground a couple of years before, but with its extraordinarily energetic brushwork and use of the palette knife and its wonderfully harmonious and original colour sense. It's an entirely original vision. Jane's future husband, Peter Greenham, had in fact been up at Oxford in the 1930s and had known Lewis before his conversion to Christianity, and the two hadn't really got on. Peter, who was actually my teacher at the Royal Academy, Peter in those days, according to Jane, was a somewhat sort of aesthetic young man, like John Betjeman. It really wasn't Lewis's cup of tea. But having said that, he did go to the first meetings at the Eagle and Child of the group with Tolkien and so on, who became known. Well, according to Peter, it was he who coined the term, the Inklings. And I think it had been a name of an undergraduate society. Anyway, Peter said he applied it to this group, and it caught on. But Jane, when she came up, rather boldly asked if she could be tutored by Lewis. But when she knocked on the door that first time, he wasn't at all what she'd expected. He didn't look like she'd expected. He didn't quite sort of sound like that either. A number of years ago, I did recorded an interview with Jane for a forthcoming documentary, the Forge of Friendship, Tolkien and Lewis, which will be coming out. You'll be able to see the whole interview there. But Eastgate Creative were very kindly allowed me to use some extracts from it. And so this is Jane just talking about what Lewis sounded like. And she felt at the time that he sounded even a little common.
I thought he had a slightly common accent, we all did. But then I heard him again 40 years later. He sounded just like anyone else.
Lewis, it sounds perfectly normal now, but it didn't then. We thought he was... And he looked like a grocer. The people who'd only read his books expected him to be all willowy, and he had quite a reddish face, and he was visually he was a disappointment.
And that first tutorial, you were with another girl.
Yes, I was with another girl, and she wrote the most boring essays. And this was because we had to take turns to read, and. But he was able to repeat. I just switched off when she began. I just couldn't bear it. And he could repeat it back to her. He had an amazing memory. And if ever he wanted to look something up, he used to get up and go to another room and find the book. He had a real visual memory. I've never come across one like that.
She had one tutorial with Charles Williams, and she used to go to all Tolkien's lectures, which she has a wonderful story about.
It was, but anyway, one day he came along and it was snowing, a terrible day, and only 6 of us turned up. And he said he was so impressed by anyone turning up, and he was going to read us a fairy tale. So he pulled out a little manuscript and read us a fairy tale, which was before he'd written any of the Lord of the Rings stuff, but after The Hobbit. And then we borrowed it from him to copy it out, and then gave it back to him. But he was very, very nice.
That hideous strength is very much sort of set in that Oxford world. True enough, it was inspired by Durham, where Lewis gave the lectures on the abolition of man. But the setting, nevertheless, is very... the wonderful description of Bragton College is clearly where you go from one quad into another and then go across a bridge and come to the Bragton Wood at the heart of it, is clearly based on Magdalen, where you go through one quad and go across a bridge and come into the wonderful deer park at the centre of it. And the character of the philologist Ransom is based on Tolkien. It's possible that some of Lewis's maudlin colleagues recognised themselves in some of the villainous dons there, and probably didn't add to his popularity. But Jane Studdock is in some ways very different from Jane Dowling, in that she's at the beginning of the novel she's married, and she isn't a Christian, whereas Jane Dowling wasn't married and was a Christian. But having said that, the character Jane is doing a PhD on John Donne. She's been a pupil of Dr. Dimble, who is the closest character in the book, perhaps, to Lewis himself, and she's clearly very intelligent. And as I said at the beginning, Lewis himself was clearly impressed with Jane's intelligence. But he wrote a very nice thing about you when you left.
Yes. He said, whatever degree I got, I certainly had a first-class mind. Well, that's been a nice thing to say about someone.
Yes, you ought to keep that framed on your wall.
Yes.
In the novel, Jane Studdock is a seer who has the gift of dreaming true dreams and seeing sort of true pictures in her mind. Well, Jane Dowling wasn't visionary in that sense. but as I said at the beginning, she was going to the Slade, and Lewis was to some extent aware of this dimension of her. There's a wonderful story.
Colouring in crayon while he was lecturing.
I was about to ask you, so you went to his lectures as well?
Went to all his lectures, and I was very into illumination, manuscript illumination. And at Selden End in Bodley, there were great big facsimiles about that tall off the floor. And the earliest English drawings, the Cadman MS, do you know those? Because Miss Griffiths, my old English tutor, she sent us there to look at the Cadman drawings and to show how advanced Anglo-Saxon drawing was, when at that time it wasn't in Europe. It was much better than any of the German stuff at that point. And just showing a natural affinity with line drawing, which I think is really interesting, which went right on up till the conquest. And so I used to draw all through the lectures, and once Lewis interrupted one of his lectures and advised everyone if the lecture became too boring to bring some coloured pencils with them to while away the time.
What did you do?
Yes, I was quite near him, you know.
In the second part of the novel, Jane Studdock joins this Christian community at St Anne's, and obviously Lewis couldn't have known it, but actually when she left Oxford, Jane Dowling joined a Dominican community and lived with them as a nun for almost a decade before having a breakdown and having to leave, after which she went back to art school, and eventually married Peter Greenham, and became, as I say, a wonderful teacher. But that spiritual intensity always remained in her pictures. Her latter life, she didn't work so much in oils, but more in tempera, which she became very expert at, but also in watercolours, which are beautifully drawn, but also this wonderfully delicate colour. And on one occasion, I'd happened to be lucky enough to go to the premiere performance of John Towner's opera Mary in Egypt, and I lent Jane the recording of this, and on my 50th birthday she gave me back the recording, and also sort of wrapped up a little watercolour, which when I opened it was an absolutely ravishing picture. Well, I think of Mary in Egypt. I think it's one of the best things she did. It's just wonderful.